Hello, welcome to Tea Time History Chat Live. Today, I'm going to talk about the Great Fire of London because we're on the run-up to the anniversary. So what are we today? 30th of August, and the fire started on the 2nd of September, went through till the 6th of September, 1666. So it sort of covers the interim between now and the next live. So let's do it today. Thank you very much for joining me live. I'm streaming on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. Please show your support with thumbs up on YouTube so that apparently it helps other people find us while we're alive. Give me some hearts on Instagram, and I think there's stars on Facebook, but I just am guessing really. So today we're going to talk about the Great Fire of London. We've also got some other bits and bobs that we might get onto, including what we're doing on History After Dark tonight, some of the videos that are now live on podcast and YouTube that you can grab hold of and you can already see or listen to, and yeah, other things that are coming up, some cool stuff that I've been up to this morning as well. So welcome. Thank you for joining me. If you want to support me, like I say, thumbs up. Melanie, first time I'm fully awake. Yes, because we're at our new time of 3 o'clock rather than 1 o'clock UK time. So it seems to be suiting people. So it looks like we might stay at this time. Mayfair Forest Switch, good afternoon to you too. Hello, Christina in Bucharest. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. So yeah, you can support me with badges on Instagram. That's the stars on Facebook, isn't it? Super chats on YouTube. But what I'd love you to do is join my Patreon. It's patreon.com/British History, and you get loads of things. Thank you, Deborah Reed, for my badge on Instagram, you sweetheart. Thank you very, very much. But yeah, over on Patreon, you at the moment have got a bonus hour with James Clark, Professor James Clark. But I'll talk more about that in a bit. I do want to say, though, thank you to Jennifer, Ellie and Gail, who have all become members of Patreon this week. So welcome, ladies. So if you have a question that you want to pop into the chat while we're going, please feel free. I apologise in advance if I don't see it. I will do my best to pick up on them. But yeah, I thought I'd talk about the Great Fire of London today because it is coming up to the anniversary. 2nd of September is when it began, 1666. Oh, thank you. I have white on today. It's because later on I will be in black for History After Dark. I've decided it's white for this and black for History After Dark. I was also, I may as well tell you now, so I'll come back to the Great Fire of London. I've also been interviewing this morning. So I've been interviewing Nicola Tallis. I might have already told you this, but she wrote this book. She's actually about to release her 5th book, but this is one of the books that are out there at the moment. Hello, Stephanie in Kentucky. Thank you for joining. Yeah, so Nicola Tallis wrote this book about Margaret Beaufort. It's a biography of Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII, matriarch of the Tudor dynasty. And I went to see Nicola speak at the Harvington History Festival earlier in the summer. Actually, I'd already spoken to her about doing an interview with me, but it was great to meet her in person. And then we got together this morning over Zoom to record an interview, and that will be available in October. In fact, I can tell you the dates. October the 15th. It will be available on YouTube a week earlier for patrons. There's one of the benefits of being a patron. In September, it is the interview with Dr. Jonathan Foyle, which I definitely have made mention of because he spoke to us about the bed of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, the marriage bed, which he's got rafts of evidence to identify it as such, and yet you can't go see it. It is not on display anywhere. You won't find a journal article written about it. And he goes into why that is and the frustrations around that, actually. So that will be available. That's just one of the parts of the interview, by the way. He goes into that, and that will be available on the 17th of September, again, a week earlier for members of my Patreon, which I might have a thing with the address on. There you are if you're on Facebook and YouTube. www.patreon, that's patreon.com/British history. There is also a link in my Instagram bio. Right, so that's done. Let's get to the Great Fire of London. Now, I don't know, is this a story that if you're not in the UK that you are familiar with? Hi, Melissa, how are you doing? Melissa's on tour with me this year. Is this a story that you're familiar with? I suppose most medieval countries have had a massive fire at some point, especially in sort of medieval times. And indeed, London isn't our only city to have suffered a catastrophic fire. However, we're coming up to the anniversary. So it began 2nd of September 1666. Now, of course, it's famous for starting in a bakery on Pudding Lane, the bakery of Thomas Fariner, who we'll come back to it later, but he escapes all blame. It's quite incredible. And pudding as well, just as an aside, if you didn't know, doesn't mean pudding as we think of pudding today. It's not a dessert. It is it's possibly from an old English word. I'm not quite sure actually which language it comes from, but it means sort of the entrails of the cattle and whatever which would have been slaughtered, and then the entrails were taken down to the river to be carted off and disposed of, and they would have gone down Pudding Lane, and so apparently that's where it comes from. So it begins on the 2nd of September. We have quite a lot of information about it. Good morning, Linda. Linda is about to come on tour with me and has been on tour with me before. Can't wait to see you. One of the reasons we know so much about it is, well, big reason is the diary of Samuel Pepys. So famous diarist of the 17th century. And he's living in London at the time. He's living on, I think it's called Seething Lane. There's actually a Pepys Lane now, which clearly wasn't around when he was alive. And he is woken early in the morning by one of his maids, Mayfair Forest, which, oh yeah, for sure. Honestly, I didn't know much about British history until little over a year ago, but the Great Fire of London was on history lessons in Polish schools. Wow, well, I wonder what the relevance was there. Ali's watching from work. Good, well done. I'll keep you entertained, hopefully, while you're doing that. So he's woken by his maid at something like 3 o'clock in the morning, and she's actually already quite agitated by this. She's hearing rumours that this is a fire that is taking hold. Fire, of course, was not unusual, and despite the fact that you didn't have an organised fire brigade, people were used to fire, they're used to tackling fire, and they would do it. They don't have, hoses and fire engines and whatever. So I suppose they might have used water for smaller fires, but one of the things they would use is fire breaks. So in fact, people's houses would be pulled down to create a break, because you've got closely packed houses. In fact, I'm going to come back to this in a bit because I want to talk about St. Paul's, but over on YouTube and Facebook, I've just put a picture up of I think that's Vanguard's a sketch of the City of London, and you've got very, very closely packed in buildings, small streets, sort of cartload wide, and so you can imagine that once fire starts, then it's going to take hold, because it just literally goes from house to house to house to house. So you'd use a fire break. It would be buildings would be taken down. The fire couldn't spread, and the damage would be limited. So this is presumably the sort of thing that Pepys is going to think, well, that's going to happen, so I'm going to back to bed. But at 7 o'clock, he's either he wakes up or he's woken up again by his maidservant, and she tells him actually now 300 houses have already been consumed by this fire. So overnight, it has gone from a sort of everyday occurrence to these tiny streets are filled with thick smoke around the fire. The weather's quite windy, so that is helping the fire. It is, I imagine, sort of small streets as well, small sort of alleyways are going to kind of create drafts and pull-throughs for the fire and the smoke, and people are beginning to panic. Church bells are being rung as warnings to wake people up, to get them aware of what's going on. And the Lord Mayor has already kind of missed his chance to do these fire breaks, because this fire has taken hold. It is being fanned by the wind. His name was Sir Thomas Bloodworth, and he famously underestimated the fire. Whether he underestimated it purely because he just didn't think it was going to be this big, or whether he was hoping it wouldn't be that big, because actually to pull down fire breaks in the middle of London, to pull down buildings, to create fire breaks in the middle of London, was going to affect the people whom he was relying on as donors to his campaign to get re-elected. There's nothing new on the earth. So the initial chance to contain this fire has been lost, and you've got people panicking. They're panicking, and at the same time you've got people just in disbelief. You've actually got people not moving, and then they're panicking last minute and trying to move. You've got carts in the street trying to get people's belongings away. It's utter chaos. It's the noise of the fire, the tolling of the bells, the crackling of the fire, the smoke, it's just hell on earth. And so you've got all this chaos, this indecision of people whether they should move or not. On the first day, one of Pepys's friends, is that how you say it, was bringing his things over to Pepys's house. So he is Pepys's house. Pepys's house sounds weird to say Pepys's. Was located around about, if you think about where the Tower of London is, it's not too far from the Tower of London. That's where his house was. He was sort of on the very edge of the city, and his friend is bringing things, his possessions over for safekeeping. By the end of the first full day, it is clear, or it looks like they're going to have to move all those things again, and Pepys is going to have to start to look to move his things as well. And he describes the scene, things like, with one's face in the wind, we were almost burned with a shower of fire drops. So you've got smoke. Good morning, Becky. You've got smoke. You've got lit embers. Hi, Jenna. How are you doing? Whipped up on the wind, catching light to other buildings, presumably landing on the people who are trying to get out, and on the people's belongings, and on the animals that are trying to flee as well. It is really, really harrowing when you start to think about it. And at the time, there were 87 parish churches in the City of London. And they're all tolling their bells. They toll their bells until, of course, they can't, and they're consumed by fire. So it's such a harrowing scene. Now, I wanted to talk about St. Paul's, old St. Paul's Cathedral in the middle of the city. Last week I spoke about Westminster and how Westminster got its name, and it was built time of Edward the Confessor and named Westminster. Well, I mean, that's not its official name, but colloquially as Westminster, dedicated to St. Peter, because in the East, the Eastminster was already established and dedicated to St. Paul. So the old St. Paul's Cathedral is sat in the city, in the middle of the city. It is. Everyone assumes it's going to be a fire break anyway because of the churchyard, and so in fact, people go there to the booksellers of Paternoster Row will go there and store their books in there, assuming that they will be safe. Unfortunately, there is already restoration work being done on the cathedral, and the scaffold sets light. The lead on the roof of St. Paul's Cathedral melts, and it rolls down the pillars crack, and the roof caves in, and the entire thing is lost. Now, that church, so that St. Paul's Cathedral, Old St. Paul's, was probably the fourth on the site dedicated to St. Paul's. So the one we've got now is the fifth. I'm going to put a little picture up on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, excuse me. It was built between, there was actually a fire there in 1087, so of the third one. And so it began to be rebuilt in 1087, but that building work carried on for a long time. It was completed in 1314. But the fourth one had been consecrated though back in 1240, and then building work had carried on. When that fire took hold, we lost the shrine of St. Erkenwald, who was an Anglo-Saxon or 7th century bishop. Also the burial place of John of Gaunt. But this is where St. Paul's Cathedral is where Arthur Tudor, the eldest son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, had married Catherine of Aragon in a very huge public ceremony. It's where Henry VII, when he won at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, he came to St. Paul's when he came to London. He came to give thanks at the altar. He put down 3 standards: the Dragon of Wales, the St. George's Cross, and the Dun Cow, which is a Lancastrian symbol. And so this church, though, by this point has been stood in part from 1087, all of it probably from around 1314, sort of completed, and then you get little bits added on and whatever, for what are we there? Over 3 centuries. And it's inconceivable that this is going to be consumed by the fire. However, it is, and we lose a lot. But St. Paul's, so not only do you lose all that, but it is actually a little community in itself. It is, it's more like a walkway inside as well. So people would walk through. Prostitutes worked there, trying to get trade. There were booksellers and pamphleteers. There were newsmongers, people who would come and tell the news from the court, from the battlefield, from the courts, wherever. It was really bustling. Thank you, Jenna, for the badge. That's very, very kind. It was a sort of central part of some people's lives. It's very interesting to think of it like that, because now we go into a cathedral and we're quiet and we're very respectful. That is not how St. Paul's Cathedral is being used in 1666. But that is all lost. It was also the burial place of Ethelred, who's another Anglo-Saxon king. So now that's St. Paul's. Then I'm going to put up what it is now for people on Facebook and Instagram. Rennes Cathedral is the 5th one. That's the one that replaced. There's a story about the dome, actually. as well. The dome of St Paul's looks very like the like St Peter's in Rome, and so actually there was a lot of objection to the dome, and it was added. Well, I mean, it's the roof, so it's the last thing that sort of went on. But when I was speaking to one of the architectural historians when I went round there a few years ago, he said, well, from the plans, Wren had designed it so that the dome was going to go on. Anyway, that's a bit of a side story. So now we know it began in Pudding Lane, in the yard of Thomas Fariner. It starts probably. See, everyone had a responsibility to make sure that their fires are out at night. You're living in a city of wood. It's been a long, dry summer by this point, and there was some carelessness anyway. So this fire starts, and the family, actually, the Fariner family, the ground floor is lit, is on fire when Thomas Fariner's son, also another Thomas, finds or discovers the fire, and they have to escape through a upstairs window into a neighbour's across the road. Now, remembering how Tudor houses, medieval houses, sort of will come in as you go up the floors. So, I mean, still dangerous. And their maid wouldn't follow them. So actually their maid perishes early on in the fire. One of the probably the first victim of the fire. And so you've got the weather is whipped up. These houses are closely packed. It's been a long, dry summer. They're all made of wood. They're dried out. They're probably not in great condition. Wattle and daub actually is quite fireproof if it's in good condition, but probably not. So how is it put out? Well, we've also already talked about the Lord Mayor, Thomas Bloodworth, being useless at the beginning. He avoids pulling down people's houses because he is trying to keep on side his donors for his next campaign to be Lord Mayor. And actually the King Charles II, this is only 6 years after the Restoration, Pepys actually goes to Whitehall to inform him of this fire, and he comes with the Duke of York, and the Duke of York, the future James II, actually has a pivotal sort of leadership role in deciding now that they're going to pull down buildings. The fire is spreading so fast that they can't pull them down; they have to blow them up. So they're using gunpowder. You can imagine again the noise, the chaos, the confusion. Really quite incredible. And it that, along with the winds dying down, that with so the fire breaks, the wind dying down, the fire running out of fuel, it sort of starts to die down, and it's sort of, the city is smouldering by the 5th or 6th of September. The rains finally come on the 9th of September and sort of cool it down, I suppose. But you've got tens of thousands of people now homeless. All the parish, or not all the parish churches, but 87 of the parish churches have been razed to the ground. 3/4 of the of London, of the city of London, has been decimated. So again, apologies for you on Instagram, but on Facebook and YouTube, I've just put up a map. This is by Wenceslas-Holler, and it's owned by the Museum of London. But you can see the white area is the area that is had been taken by the fire. So it's basically most of the city of London, and it comes. And someone did mention this earlier in the comments. I didn't see who. It does come incredibly close to the Tower of London. So there are some surviving buildings from the Great Fire. One of them is the Tower of London. Had the fire have got there, then speculation is that because that's where weaponry, gunpowder, and all of that is kept, or was kept, that would have blown up, and we may well not have had the tower, especially, well, not as it is now. All Hallows by the Tower, the church there where people beheaded on Tower Hill would be first taken, and they might be taken elsewhere to be buried, but first taken, that survives. Pepys actually goes up to on top of the tower to watch what's happening at one point. That unfortunately falls foul of a Luftwaffe bomb in the Blitz. Some of it's still standing, but a lot of that was lost. But Pepys' own church, St. Olav's, where he is buried, that survives the fire. And he talks about the congregation the day after, or the week after, excuse me, the congregation being full of strangers, people who have no parish to go to, and just the incredible melancholy, despair that people are feeling. And that's, there's a very, very human story, very, very human side to the story of the Great Fire of London. Think of the buildings going, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about the rebuilding. But people were, I was going to say devastated to the that their whole lives have been taken away from them, their place of work, their livelihoods, their homes, everything had been taken away. And in fact, Pepys had a cousin, a favourite cousin, and her husband actually committed suicide as a result of losing everything in the Great Fire. Now, at the time, that's illegal as well. So anything he still owned would be confiscated by the Crown, because it's illegal to commit suicide, which meant it wouldn't be available to his wife. I think Pepys, having his link into the Crown, into the King, was able to help his cousin out, I think, for that. But that is what would have happened. Now, the official death toll, I don't know if this has been revised, but it's always gone down as 6. The fire at certain points was burning at 1700 degrees Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, I'm afraid, but basically hot enough that people could have perished in the fire and not being and there'd be no trace. You've also got then the follow-on disease that came. We're talking September, so we're going into the autumn and into that following winter that killed people. And like I've just given the example of people taking their own life because of the despair of it. So you'd have thought with all this going on that there would have been well, it's natural, the blame game. What comes next? Who is blamed for this? Not, as you might expect, Thomas Fariner. So it's odd because it seems that he is the starting point of the fire is well known, and yet I'm not sure when that comes to light, because the people who are blamed for it, one, the Lord Mayor Bloodworth takes his fair share of blame for not acting early enough, but there was a big swathe of people who blamed, who thought there was a plot, basically, that it was foreigners, especially Catholics, that were that had caused this fire deliberately. And indeed, that's another group of people who died as a result of the fire. There were lynchings in the street, awful things, because there was rumours going around that Catholics had thought, well, this is God's. This is God's judgment on the new king, the Protestant Charles II, who converted on his deathbed. But there was also a man who actually confessed. So there was a French watchmaker, or Frenchman, but supposedly a watchmaker, who claimed that he'd been sent by the Pope to start the fire, and he was executed for this crime. However, He had claimed that the fire began in Westminster. Well, Westminster is around the bend of the river. And so he's not even in the right place. And actually, he wasn't in London at all on the 2nd of September. But such was the fervour for wanting to blame someone that someone was executed for it. Other people took the law into their own hands. Pepys talks about the streets are not safe for foreigners to walk because there are lynch mobs out. People are so angry. And yet, yeah. Thomas Fariner, nothing. And a committee had been set up to have a look at it. I had read somewhere, and I can't remember where, so take this with a pinch of salt, I might be wrong, that Thomas Fariner was actually on the committee which investigated the fire. Becky, I took a walking tour that started at the fire monument. A small church nearby had survived the fire and the blitz, but was heavily damaged by a crane falling on it. Do I know which one? No. There is the fire. Well, there's a church that is completely escaped. The name of it completely escapes me at the moment. Where Fariner is supposed to be buried, which it also has a I'll remember it. Maybe if I remember it, I'll post it later. It is supposed to be where Fariner's buried, although when I went to try and find his grave, no one there knew about that, and I couldn't find it. It has a model of Old London Bridge in it. That church that I'm talking about. I don't know which one is the one that would have survived the fire, the blitz, and then had a crane fall on it. Not sure. Sorry, Becky. But yeah, so so you've got monument now. Let's talk about that because that's what Becky's talking about. She started her walking tour at the monument. It was erected on the it's 202 foot tall, and if you laid it on its side, it's supposed to be 202 foot away from where the fire started. And on the top is a golden urn, which is supposed to represent the fire. It's 313 steps. How many steps is it? 311, excuse me, steps, if you wanted to go up it. It has got quite good views. I mean, it's completely swallowed up by surrounding buildings now. But it would have been obviously completely visible when it was first put up as a monument to the survival of the city and what it had been through. It is on the site of the first church to be taken, which I think was St Margaret's, but I can't remember. But anyway, the monument is stood on the site of the first church that was taken by the fire. And like I say, 202 foot tall because it's 202 foot away from the from the point of the start of the fire. I think that was about all that I was going to say about the fire. It took a long time to rebuild the city. Oh, that was what I was going to say, actually. So lots of the city went, obviously, through the fire in terms of the buildings. The committee, by the way, crucially ruled that it was a foreign enemy that had started the fire, not carelessness, not an accident. And that had implications for who paid for the rebuilding. So that meant that landlords had to foot the bill for the rebuilding, not tenants. So there's that, that's fairly interesting. I wonder if Thomas Fariner was a tenant and not a owner. Don't know. And also to pay for the churches and the cathedrals, there was a new tax levied on people, a coal tax. But they were looking at people like Wren, and there was other architects of the time, Robert Hooke, John Evelyn, they were thinking, right, this is a perfect opportunity. We're going to have wide streets and boulevards. It's going to be beautiful, but land ownership issues got in the way. Just a need to rebuild quickly as well meant that actually buildings just went back up pretty much where they were. There were more building regulations in terms of how tall a building could be, how what material it could be faced with, how close it could be to other buildings, but it was rebuilt fast, and that opportunity to come up with a brand new street plan was lost. So it's intriguing to think of what kind of layout we could have had, a completely different London, but we don't, which does mean though that we have the street layout of medieval London, so you can still follow the procession that say Elizabeth I would have taken from the Tower of London through the city, Edward VI, Anne Boleyn. You can still take the route that they would have taken because those streets more or less exist, just nowhere near in the way that they would recognise. So by the time we get to next week's live, that would be all over pretty much. So there you go. Now, if you want to hear more about the Great Fire of London from someone else who knows way more than I do, I have a interview on YouTube, and it must be on the podcast as well, with Hazel Forsyth, who works at the Museum of London, and she's actually written a book called Butcher Baker Candlestick Maker, and it's about the people. She's the source I have for the stories of the hardships that the people of London went through following the fire. It's a great book if you can get hold of it. But if you want to see my interview with her, which is based on that book, then that is on YouTube and on the podcast. I think it's on the podcast, definitely on YouTube. Which, by the way, it also says that when I do a video, it goes on the podcast, or goes on a podcast. Anyway. So yeah, if you want to know more about that, at the moment on YouTube, where are we? Wednesday, episode 3 in the Dissolution of the Monasteries series has just gone live at 1:00 today. That's with James Clark, and today. So it's the third episode today. I was trying to think what the title of the one is today, but I've looked at them so many times that I'm going to mix it up, which it is. But that is available, and the 4th and 5th will be available obviously tomorrow and Friday, on YouTube and on the podcast. And if you are a member of Patreon, then there is an extra hour with James. Now he's talking about things like what Anne Boleyn's involvement, but I mean, obviously she dies in 1536, and the dissolution doesn't really get going until after that. But what are her views already? What has she expressed already? He goes into that, and the outcome for the nuns and abbesses, so the women who were in these religious institutions, because they were not allowed, the only thing they weren't allowed to do is get out of their vow of chastity, which meant they couldn't go and get married. And many dealt with it in very different ways. Linda, so Linda is a member of my Patreon. That series is excellent. Thank you so much. Number 3 is the Valor Ecclesiasticus. Thank you. I thought it was, and I didn't want to say in case I got it wrong. Oh, Chelsea, thank you so much for the badges on Instagram. Thank you. That's very, very, very kind. Yes, if you're watching and you are enjoying, please, you can do thumbs up, I think, on YouTube, and hearts on Instagram to help people find me while I'm live. But also, if you want to help me, support me, keep going, then there's badges on Instagram, super chats on YouTube, and stars on Facebook. And of course, what I'd love you to do is join my Patreon at patreon.com/British history. Now you get therefore the extra. It's because I can give you a lot more back there, including this extra bonus hour with James Clark about the dissolution. I hope it seems to be, and I hope this is the case, that my patrons who've watched all of the episodes, there's 5 so far, and people who are now watching on YouTube, it is. Thank you, Melissa. Melissa also recommends my Patreon. It is looking at the dissolution in a different way. And when I say different, not sort of a different perspective, but actually, I would say properly looking at it, because James looks at it from the point of view of the people going through it, and through that, you get a far. Thank you, Jinsak, for my badges. That's very, very kind on Instagram. By looking at the dissolution from the people who were involved in it, you get so much more clarity as to what actually happened. The indecision, the lack of plan from above. So not this Henry VIII is going to just dissolve all the monasteries because he fancies the cash narrative, or Thomas Cromwell and initially Anne Boleyn as such religious zealots that they just want these places wiped off the map. No, these things are way too simplistic. In some ways, I would argue they're not actually true because they have been totally oversimplified. And if you like the interviews with James, like I say, there's the extra bonus hour on Patreon, but also his book, The Dissolution of the Monasteries: A New History, is on Audible, and it's I'm just recommending because I love it. I'm not getting any commission or anything like that. I just think it's a wonderful book. And if you are on, I think I have not said this yet because this has just been confirmed. If you are coming on the Anne Boleyn tour in April 2024, so this is the first one of the year next year. It begins on the 30th of April, goes through to the 4th of May. If you're on that tour, James will be coming to speak on that tour about sort of Anne Boleyn and the Reformation. So it'd be amazing. But yeah, so he talks about, there are things in there. I'm not sure if this is in some of the interviews, but examples of you. Let me preface this by saying you'd think everyone is so frightened of Henry VIII that they don't try and do any shenanigans. That's always been sort of what I was thinking. But you have people, these religious people signing over property to other people before the dissolution, because they hear the commissioners are coming, so they sign it over. So you can't have that bit because that's actually not ours. It's not ours. We sold it to my brother or something like that. So you see very, very human things happening, trying to get through loopholes. You have people monks moving back into the buildings after the commissioners have left. Where are they going to go? But it talks about, what they're going to wear. There's all sorts. There are probably as many unique stories as well as there are people who were involved. From the point of view of the monks and nuns and abbots and abbesses and that were there, through to the commissioners as well, and people who came to try and close the monasteries down. So anyway, so the Valor Ecclesiasticus episode, thank you, Linda, for confirming that to me. It is available today. That's available right now. So you can, if you fancy treating yourself to that, you can go and listen to that after this. And the Valor Ecclesiasticus is, James goes into what it was for, what it contained, and a very exciting piece of work that he is doing at the moment, trying to get it accessible to everyone, which would be, I think, a incredible resource, especially for local historians. That would be amazing. Yeah, because there's some places that you just can't see there was anything left. I was at a place called Wenlock Priory the other day, which you may have seen me post about on Instagram, and that that priory had stood since before the Norman Conquest. It had been founded. It must have been just inconceivable. What have we got that's if you think of anything that could have been around for, so what are we talking, 6, 7, 8 centuries, nearly 10 centuries in some cases. Um, um, these institutions, they're permanent. They're permanent, and they're going to go. And on Friday, so the last episode, James is talking about how even right up to the end, the ones that are left do not believe it's going to be a total dissolution. They think they're going to survive, which again knocks on or turns on its head the assumption we have that Henry had this idea of closing down all of the monasteries. In fact, what comes across and what James actually says is that Henry is inconsistent. He doesn't know what he's going to be doing. There is no clear plan for the monasteries. So I really hope you enjoyed that series. I've really enjoyed putting it together, and it took a lot because James was so generous with his time that I wanted to serialize it so that you could watch it in nice bite-sized chunks. So it took me a little while to get it out to you, but I hope you really enjoy it. And like I said, you can listen to it on the podcast as well. So it doesn't, you don't have to watch it. You can listen to it on the podcast. I've already mentioned, but the interview I've done with Dr. Jonathan Foyle, that will be available on the 17th of September, a week earlier, for patrons. I have just interviewed, again, as I said earlier, Dr. Nicola Tallis. That will be available in October. And Linda says it was well worth the wait. Good, thank you. I'm so glad. So the interview with Nicola will be available in October. Patrons were able to put their own questions to Nicola. In fact, Nicola, Jonathan, Gareth Russell's interview is also available right now on the Palace, his latest book about Hampton Court Palace, 500 years of history. And patrons were able to put their questions to James. It's a running theme. If you're a member of my Patreon, you get to put your questions to the historians that I am interviewing. So that's also, I think, well worth it. And then that part of the interview, those questions and answers, is an extended version. It makes up the extended version of the episode of the interview, and patrons get that, and it's all ad free as well, so you don't get the annoying adverts either. I will be here again. I'll be here actually. Before I talk about next week, I'll be here tonight. I'll be on History After Dark tonight. It's just me and Catherine Brooks tonight. So we'll be on History After Dark on YouTube, history.after.dark on Instagram. And it is it's a bit of an Ask Us Anything. So I've put a request out on the History After Dark Instagram story for suggestions of what we can talk about tonight. So it could go all over the place. That's so we shall see. But it should be fun. So I'd love to see you there. And I will be back here for History Chat next Wednesday at 3:00 UK time. I am then away the following week. Linda and me are going on tour with some other fabulous people. We are going on the Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots tour. So please follow on Instagram and Facebook. I will be on the stories there, posting about the tour and where we're at and what we're doing. Again, if you're a member of my Patreon, you'll be getting some behind the scenes things as well. So I think for now, the other thing actually, before I go, Book Club 2024, the long list for Book Club, which is in my Patreon, is I'm going to announce that and put that out to vote for the vote within the next few days. I have a long list of books. this is what we did last year, and the members of Patreon can vote as to which books we are going to look at in 2024. If you want to join, then our next book club meeting is the 17th of September. We're discussing Houses of Power by Simon Thurley. The book club meeting after that, the last one for 2023, is the 12th of November, and that is to discuss The Sisters Who Would Be Queen by Leander Delisle. But by then, we will also have our voted on list of books for 2024. And I will do my best as well to put the dates together as well for those book club meetings so everyone knows what's happening. So that's another interesting thing, cool thing that's happening. Right. But for now, I will leave you to your day. Thank you so much for joining me live. Thank you if you're joining on the catch up. Thank you for listening on the podcast. And I will see you all hopefully tonight on History After Dark, or see you next week here. Someone's just said about my jumper. It's quite cold here. If you're Linda, pack a jumper. It's quite cold. All right, everyone. I'll see you later.